10 years ago, what we have today would be considered AGI, right?
Okay.
Or it would be considered ASI, some aspect of it anyways, right? They're going to do unimaginable things by 2030. And then it's just going to explode right after that. And then, 10, 15 years, he says there'll be billions of these things.
Which sectors are likely going to feel these earliest shockwaves first from ASI? And how do you think this disruption will unfold?
Experiments running where people can communicate without talking, just through thought. They can control devices, an iPad, just through thought. Humanity and technology will interweave to a point where it'll be seamless. We won't even think of technology as technology.
This ASI is no longer a theory but a reality. What challenges the leaders are going to be facing?
Aging, cancer, all major challenges will be solved easily by 2030. Easily.
What happens when machines don't just help us work, but actually outthink us in every discipline? Science, medicine, finance, even creativity. That's the tipping point, what is called Artificial Superintelligence, or ASI, when AI surpasses human intelligence across the board. And here is a shocker. Leading technologists believe it could arrive as soon as 2027. That's actually 2 years from now. For global CEOs, investors, and policymakers, that is not science fiction. It is a strategic challenge and an extraordinary opportunity unfolding right on real time. In this episode of Tech Foresight podcast, we asked 3 urgent questions. What exactly is ASI? Why does it matter for the future of business and society? And what early signals should leaders be watching now to avoid being blindsided? Guiding us in this, Stephen Ibaraki, global futurist, venture capitalist, and founder of the UN AI for Good initiative. He spent decades advising the world's most powerful tech companies and international bodies on what's coming next. Stay with us. This conversation could change the way you think about leadership, innovation, and the very definition of intelligence. Welcome to the Tech Foresight podcast, where we explore how technology is reshaping the future and what leaders need to do about it. I am Diana Daniels, and today we're going to be tackling one of the most urgent questions in business and society. What happens when artificial intelligence not only matches but surpasses our human intelligence? And my guest today is Stephen Ibaraki. He is chairman and founding managing general partner of REDDS Capital and founder of the UN AI for Good Global Summit. Over 5 decades, he has held senior roles across venture capital, global science organizations, and top industry. Think tanks influenced over $100 trillion in sustainable investment worldwide. A multiple award-winning futurist, educator, and investor, Stephen brings a unique global perspective to the coming era of artificial superintelligence, ASI. So together, we're going to explore why ASI may arrive sooner than you think, the early signals already visible, and how today's leader can prepare for a world where machines may maybe outthink us all. So Stephen, thank you. Thank you for joining us here on the Tech Foresight podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you.
So Diana, it's such a pleasure to be on this podcast with you as well. You are just remarkable. You have an outstanding history of contribution, innovation, investment, sustainability, diversity. Definitely a champion globally across so many different communities. So one of the top entrepreneurs globally today. So congratulations on all of the marvelous history of success you've got.
Thank you, Stephen. Listen, artificial superintelligence is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot everywhere. I would like for our audience to understand from your vantage point of view. You've been advising huge companies, and also you're the founding of this UN AI for Good initiative. So what does ASI really look like in practice? And what early concrete evidence convinced you that it's not just science fiction?
So maybe I'll give a little bit of context. So, I've been reading since I was three, encyclopedias. I built my first computer when I was 10. I built the first commercial microcomputers back when I was like in my teens, and then the first enterprise network systems with AI back in the 80s. So I've been doing this a long, long, long time, and of course, advising Microsoft under NDA. So I've seen all of their products since the 1970s, right? And being able to provide input on them and things like that. It's under NDA because I see it before it gets released, right? So, and that still continues to this day. So, and then if you look back, I did a YPO Edge speech back in 2019 in Cape Town, and that's quite a few years ago. But if you look at that talk, everything that I talk about in that talk is actually what's happening today. I talk
Yeah.
about quantum computing. I talk about AI. I said it's going to be conversational. I said it's going to be able to innovate and I also talk about CRISPR technologies and things like that. So it's rare, but YPO made that talk public. It's under YouTube, and if you look at it, you'll find that it actually predicts exactly where we are today. And if you go back even further to 2016, I did the keynote for the International Conference on Software Engineering. That's called ICSE, International Conference Software Engineering. It's still there. It's the
Mm.
number one conference in the world, hosted by ACM, or number one in computing science, IEEE, number one tech engineering, and the National Science Foundation. And all of the major companies are actually sponsors. So I did a keynote predicting where we are today, and if you look, and the deck is still there. So if the audience went took a look, the deck, my keynote deck is still there, and everything in that deck is actually what's happening today. And so if you were to go back to a talk I gave in for Zephon back in 2020, April 2020, I did all 10 keynotes. I was the first one in history of that conference. It was a C-level conference to their enterprise clients. And I was the first one to be asked to do all 10 keynotes over 2 days.
Oh,
Every year they had 10 different keynotes, 10 different people, and it had to be novel. Novel meaning
yeah.
requirement of keynoting was you had to produce novel materials. If you were to look at that, and that predicts in many ways where we are today. And so whether it's back in the 60s, or the 70s, or the 1980s, or the 1990s, 2000, um, uh, to 2015, I was asked by a group of 100 CEOs, the top 100 CEOs, financial services, if I can help them look 10, 15 years into the future. Some of it went public because of articles I've written, but the rest is NDA. But there's an article I wrote in Forbes, and if you look at that article, everything I predicted then, and I helped them over many years, is really where we are today. So I've got this history of predicting where we are today. So I just want to leave that as a context. So if you were to go back into the 60s when I first built my first computer when I was 10, and if you were to say, and keep in mind, I was already predicting back then where we're going to be today, but if you were to look back then, and if you were to talk to the top scientists in the world at that time, they would have said we have AGI already. We have artificial general intelligence, and they would say we have artificial superintelligence. They would have absolutely have uniformly said that. And the same thing would have been in the 70s. If you would ask the top scientists when I was creating all these technologies, the first AI systems, the first enterprise computers networked together for atomic energy cannon and things like that. And you were to, and if I were to ask all the top scientists, they would the same thing. If you see what we have today, they would say that's ASI, AGI, same thing in the 80s, the 90s. But I went on the road in 2016, and there's two surviving videos where I was interviewed, and there was unscripted. And I actually described where we are today in AI. And at that time, people would have thought it's science fiction, it's not possible. And people would kind of maybe disparage, you thinking that's too futuristic. And maybe it's 2100.
So
Just
just for
does.
our audience, Stephen, if they need to understand what is the difference between AGN and ASI, in simple words, what would you say is that difference?
AGI, and I'll keep it sort of simple, is that's where AI is like the best of us. So let's
Mm,
say you have a top physicist. So it's kind of like the equivalent of that top physicist, or you have a mathematician, or a coder, or an artist, or a musician. So whatever the field, AGI is really where it's like the best of us. And in fact, there was a recent study just came out where they kind of did a formal application of the Turing test. The Turing test is where can you talk to this thing? You don't know it's a machine or human, and of course it
mm,
easily passed it. And this is kind of a more scientific study that was done just recently. So, and then we'll give other proof too. So that's kind of like AGI, right? It
yeah.
seems like the best of us, the smartest of us. ASI, artificial superintelligence, it's where it's actually better than the best of us. So it's
Mm,
better than the top mathematicians and the physicists and the poets and the musicians and whatever the field it is. ASI is actually where it's better than the best of us, right? So now the question is that I talked to Jeff Hinton earlier this year. Jeff Hinton got the Nobel Prize in physics for his work, and this is for AI. And he got the Turing Award back in 2018, which is the Nobel Prize in Computer Science for his work in AI. But it's really unusual for somebody to get a Nobel Prize in physics for this kind of work, and it's because of his foundational work, right? I
mm,
actually talked to him early this year, and in fact interviewed him, and he even said if you go back 10 years, I would have. He said I and most scientists. I'm paraphrasing, so I recommend
yeah.
go and take a look. They would have said that what we have today, like today, they would have thought that wouldn't be possible, or maybe it's 50 years from now or 100 years from now. They would have thought. And I know when I was approached by these 100 top CEOs of financial services to help 10 years into the future, or 15, and back in 2015, for sure, all of them would have, if I described where we are today, and I did, I predicted this would happen. They would have thought, no, it's many years in the future. It's AGI, yeah, it's like the best of us, or it's ASI, it's better than the best of us. But yet we have it, and even the top scientist who won the Nobel Prize in the Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computing Science for his work, he said that this would be the case, and in fact, in 2023, he left Google. So he was an independent professor, really famous in the University of Toronto at the Vector Institute, and he's considered the godfather of AI because he's kind of like the hub where all of this deep learning tech kind of comes from, or people are spokes from him, right?
Mm,
And he left Google in 2023, um, and he left Google so that he could talk more freely, without embarrassing Google or things like
right, right.
that.
Or compromising them or something, right?
Yeah, and because they're a public company and they're corporate and things like that.
Mm,
So, and if you look at the interview I did with him this year, he will say it's a non-zero chance. Non-zero mean it's a real probability, and now he's throwing out figures like 10 to 20% that it could even extinguish us. I don't believe that. I don't think it's going to exterminate us, but and he for sure believes they have subjective experience, and subjective experience is just a fancy way of saying these things are kind of like us. Like us in a way. They're it's not human intelligence. It's not
mm,
human. It's machine, but it
right.
could do things that we do. Back a few years ago, a guy named Leopold Aschenbrenner, who used to be working for OpenAI, laughed and he wrote a paper, right? And the audience should take a look at that because he's predicting that where we are today, it was going to happen. People were throwing stones, like they were, ridiculing him and saying it's like, and you know what? And then this year, Daniel Coco Tylo, another gentleman who used to work with OpenAI, wrote another paper and where he's suggesting there's a possibility that we're going to have some kind of like AGI or ASI during this time frame. I mean, within this time frame, and from now to 2030. In fact, Coco Tylo suggesting that could even be 2028. Initially, in his paper, he was saying 2027. And then a few months later, he came out and said, you know what, maybe it's 2028. Interestingly enough, I was actually approached by a group of multinational CEOs and an organization, right, who are heads of that organization, which will remain private because there's many multinational CEO organizations out there. Anyways, and they said, Stephen, we saw this video based on Daniel Kokotailo's work, but really also, I would say, referencing Leopold Aschenbrenner as well. And do you think this is going to happen? ASI, artificial superintelligence, is like better than the best of us. That's going to happen in 2027, and then we're concerned. How do we prepare? What does this mean to the world? And so I actually had a private meeting with them. I call it an AMA, an Ask Me Anything.
Mm-hmm.
So where they just ask questions and I just answer. And then I followed up with a fairly lengthy document of everything we discussed, plus proof points of indicators that, you know what, maybe there's some glimmers of ASI or AGI already, right? And I uh, referred to Jeff Hinton and my interview with him and things like that, right? So,
And this is what I would like, like for us to push our time forward, let's say like in 2030. And if it's 5 years from now, this ASI is no longer a theory but a reality, what chances the leaders are going to be facing?
sometimes public companies are afraid to do it in public because they don't want to scare people or and they don't want people not to use their products and things like that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um so so there's a real well, let's put it this way. 10 years ago, what we have today would be considered AGI, right?
Okay.
Or it would be considered ASI, some aspect of it anyways, right? Doesn't have to be human though. So we got to stop thinking it has to be human like. It could match us, but doesn't have to be human intelligence, right? So
Right, right.
okay, so what will the world look like? But it's not just AI. It's really the convergence of what I've been in my keynotes calling the S10, synergistic 10 technologies that are creating this shift in how everything is going, right? So it's not just AI, it's really a combination of all of it accelerating. So now this is going to get a little bit technical, but
Okay.
okay, so the synergistic 10 are the hyper accelerating 10 synergistic technologies that are accelerating all industry, government, society, all integrated with AI. And the synergistic 10 technologies are supercomputing and high performance computing, it's chip technologies, it's networking, quantum, advanced materials, AI, robotics, biotechnologies, neurotechnologies, clean energy, sustainable energy. And I would even add 11th, that could be advanced manufacturing space. So those are these kind of 10 technologies that are converging, accelerating, like a flywheel effect. They're additive so that it's not 1 and 1 equals 2, it's 1 and 1 equals 1,000. They're additive. They're actually increasing their capabilities by working together. That's a synergistic 10. And then there's this thing I call the shift. And the shift is the synergistic 10 creating hyperacceleration greater than 2 times, impact magnification on the marketplace greater than 5 times, involving frontier trajectories of these synergistic 10, which are going to create
Mhm.
new markets and new moonshot products and services And it's going to create transformative challenges. And the transformative challenges could be economic, social, geopolitical, ethical, safety, privacy, risk, governance, regulatory. So those are the challenges that we have to work with, right? And so what would the world look like? Well, the world will look like, Diana, you and I are good friends, and I really respect you, and we're communicating verbally, but we won't communicate verbally. We'll have a brain computer interface, and we'll be to communicate without using words, right?
Mm.
You and I will be to transport um, into a world which seems to have other dimensions because we can create a virtual space to enable all of that. Can you imagine then you will have access to all knowledge, but without having to type it in? Like right now,
And how soon are we that from there? I mean, it's 2025. You think that this is when? By when?
well, some of us will be to have this before 2030,
Wow.
and then it'll democratize. So, in other words, right now, I can think of multidimensional spaces, right, just with my
Hmm.
abilities, and then I can access all these different technologies to do more, right?
Yeah.
What if I was fully integrated with that? I didn't have to communicate it, which is slow. I didn't have to type it, which is slow. What if I could seamlessly think it, and that would integrate with how I think? Now, can you imagine then? I would have access to all knowledge, and I would have an understanding of all that all knowledge integrated with my thinking, right? And
That's
then
great. Yeah.
I could then combine in unlimited ways patterns and see how everything is interconnected. So it'll give us a kind of like a seamless capability to think and across a million different variables in ways that we just could not even conceive of. Imagine for a moment you look at your pet, let's call your pet dog Sam. You go, Sam, I want to discuss with you today matrix multiplication mathematics. And
Mm.
then I want to discuss space travel. And I read an article on, Peter Fenwick or somebody else on something like panpsychism. The dog will not understand. Does not have the capability of understanding, right?
Right.
So we are now that dog. And by 2030, some of us will have the capability of being the human compared to the dog and understanding and having this awareness that goes transcends what that kind of capability will be. So right now, a normal human being won't be able to even imagine what that's like because they don't have that kind of capability to see in that way or to sense in that way and so on. Right?
What it gives me this is, like we were in Davos, and I already said Davos, like it was like, I don't know how many years ago. It was just January. We're in September. And probably we're publishing out this like in October. But the World Economic Forum said that by 2030, obviously, an AI-driven automation will transform more than 1 billion jobs worldwide. So, in your view, which sectors, either finance, healthcare, telecom, manufacturing, which sectors are likely going to feel these earliest shockwaves first from ASI, and how do you think this disruption will unfold?
All sectors. So all the tech sectors, for example, you're already seeing this in the big tech companies. They're laying off.
Well, mhm.
You're already seeing this now in graduates of computing science programs. They're having more difficult getting jobs, right? And this is
Yeah.
at the forefront of tech. And these are students who study artificial intelligence and things like that. So even amongst the most advanced professions out there, you're already seeing some kind of an impact.
Right.
So it's going to influence technology, any tech, healthcare, financial services, telecom, but even the ones that you think it's not going to affect, things like the restaurant business, or
Okay.
hospitality. All of these technologies are now going to be immersed in robots, right? So
Mm.
you got things like Figure AI, you got Aptronics, Tesla, Unitree, Boston Dynamics, and even the human robotics space. I estimate the human robotics space by 2027 will be a 15 billion dollar marketplace, right? And that robots as a service by 2034 will be on the high end, let's say 125 billion. So there's even that area is really massively growing. And a company to watch is Figure AI. They recently raised around, I think, about 39 billion, something like that, at 30 billion
Mhm.
plus, but I think it was 39 billion. And but they have something called the vision and language action model, the Helix model, and it can generalize. In other words, you can give this robot, fully articulating humanoid robot, doesn't look like us, so you can't think of it like us, but you can give it a novel problem and it just solves it in real time. You give it a situation it doesn't never seen before, it solves in real time, right? So even those hospitality, those industries where you think, no, you need people, you're gonna have robots in those spaces, right? And in fact,
Right.
I did a fireside chat last year, over a year ago, but a year and a half ago, with Bernard Kozla, and he even said, and again, I'm just paraphrasing, so go to the original interview, but
Yeah.
he says they're going to do unimaginable things by 2030, and then it's just going to explode right after that. And then 10, 15 years, he says there'll be billions of these things. And so just to give you a little bit of background of Vinod Khosla, he was the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, which created the commercial computer
Hmm.
marketplace, right? And he exited at a billion plus, and then he became a really famous investor. I would say, in my opinion, probably the top investor ever. He's been many, many times in the Forbes Midas Touch list, like years and years and years and years as a top investor. And in fact, he invested, and again, I encourage the audience to take a look. Don't take a word for it. Do your own research. But I guess I'm just going from memory, but I believe he invested 50 million in
Hmm.
OpenAI in 2019, just to show you that he can kind of see where things are going. That's in 2019. And in August, OpenAI closed around a 300 billion, and then their employees were looking for a secondary sale. Secondary
Right.
meaning, to the audience, where you can sell shares to others, other investors, but the prices that were being negotiated a week later is 500 billion. 500 billion in August, 300 billion, and then negotiation amongst the employees of 500 billion valuation, right, of OpenAI. Bernard invested in 2019 at
Wow.
50 million. So he's done well, right?
Mm.
In fact, they're very successful, one of the most successful investors to Kleiner Perkins before he started his own investment group. So he is saying these things are really increasing, and even things like NVIDIA is investing heavily in this, and they created a world model now for robots. So what field won't be affected, right?
Okay.
Because we used to think there was kind of like a barrier where you had to have mechanical capability, but now we're embodying these things into robots. So Diana, you can actually buy a robot for your home now from Unitree. You
I
can
could.
actually
I
go,
could.
yeah, you can
But,
buy one.
but I want to probably serve in our audience of we have lots of CEOs and also our entrepreneurs, and you're advising all these top guys that are able to see the future, and also thanks to you, they can get more info on it. But for the CEOs and board of directors out there that are listening to us right now, what decisions over the next 24 or 36 months from now do you think that they will determine whether they thrive or they're, being left behind by the time that we reach into these 2030 predictions? You see what they need to be, looking at.
It's interesting. I was actually invited in 2020, a time frame, to do a private keynote to a group of CEOs and C-level executives, almost like a YPO, but not YPOs, their own CEO group, about 3,000. And they asked me that same question. This is 5 years ago now, 2020.
Right.
And I indicated you have to set up like an innovation foresight office.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to spend time in there, just like Bernard Kozla in my fireside chat. He says,
Right.
like, what does he do to prepare? What does he do? He spends time each day reading on the outlier, on the fringe of what's out there, right? So he can think about it and be prepared for it, make the right investments. Um, and for CEOs, you programmatically have to create some kind of foresight capability within your company. And
Mm-hmm.
then look at the S10 and follow it, and then join ACM or IEEE to keep track of the forefront technologies, and then spend some time and programmatic, not just not doing anything, but think about the impact it's going to have, and then how you can embed that through pilots, testing into your company so you're prepared. A good example is JP Morgan. JP Morgan. So I told you that I was invited by the Financial Services Roundtable, these top 100
Mm-hmm.
CPOs at
Mm-hmm.
the time, representing 92.7 trillion in assets
Yeah.
under management, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to look 10, 15 years into the future. So JP Morgan's one of those companies that was part of the FSR, the Financial Services Roundtable, but MasterCard, Citibank, they were all part of this group of 100 CEOs. But if you look at JP Morgan, they're investing in quantum. They've
Okay.
invested in the last round, Quantinuum. And
Mm.
Quantinuum just raised around, their quantum company raised around a 10 billion
Mm-hmm.
valuation, right? Raising 600 billion. Side Quantum, another one is like it just raised around about 7 billion, I think. Mark, the valuation of 7 billion. So you see, JP Morgan already invested. They got teams working on that. They got teams even back in 2015 and 16, they were looking at AI, pilots running it, looking at where things are going. And so you got to spend time to at the board level and at the C level, to have a team to look at what's out there, think about how you ingest it, run pilots to test it, and then a program to scale those pilots, right? So
But is there like anything that they can see? Okay, if I'm not doing these by X, I might be, not getting there.
if they aren't incorporating now agentic AI, already looking at it, the PwC has already done a study this year where they're saying, I think it was 79% of American companies are actually looking and testing it now. If you're not testing it already in some way,
You're
and
definitely being behind,
yeah, but not only behind, then it becomes competitive, right? The
right?
other, your supply chain, your competitors, they're going to outcompete you. And keep in mind that when you implement these new technologies, it's not instant. You have to run pilots. That's 18 months. Then you have to look at, you run a proof of concept. You have to do a pilot. It's a 3-year process, right? Before you can scale it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there's already companies starting to scale these technologies. So
And did you see like in any specific regions, let's say either US or the European Union or even Asia, where they are positioning themselves to set the rules for this ASI era?
I would say China definitely is preparing
Mm-hmm.
for sure. On the regulatory side, I would say they're ahead.
Right.
Um, and then also in terms of at least state-sponsored embedding all of the S10, supercomputing chip technologies, because they're on the embargo stuff or they're prevented, then they've had to grow their in-house chip area.
So,
So they're
so, so, so this story that we hear in the media or like from other governments saying like China, that the US is ahead of China, do you believe that is really good or not really?
Um, so if you there are in some areas like in supercomputing, okay, so let's go over the S10, right? Supercomputing,
Mm-hmm.
hyperphysics computing, they match, or it may even be ahead. Certainly not behind. In chip
Right.
technologies, they are a bit behind, but they're
Mm-hmm.
putting so much resources in there that they're catching up, right?
Very fast.
Right. And then the next one, networking, 6G, they're actually ahead.
Yeah.
So 6G is a network where it's AI by design. It's AI
Mm-hmm.
every layer. It has sensing and communication built into 6G networks. Um, it has the meaning and the intent of the data as metadata within the 6G network. That's part of 6G. They're already ahead on 6G, and they're already ahead on internal high speed broadband as well. So of the three we mentioned so far, I would say they're at least ahead or equal and catching up on the chips. Now let's go to quantum.
Mm.
Quantum, they're at least where we are.
Okay.
And then if you look at advanced materials, I would say at least where we are, even ahead. If you look at AI machine learning, a year ago they were thought to be way behind, and then DeepSeek came out, and it's shocked the world, right?
Right.
Right, and then DeepSeek just released a paper, I believe, in Nature, maybe a week ago, and people around the world looking at it and they go, "Wow!"
Yeah,
And
yeah,
open
yeah.
sourced it. It's open weights. They open source. They're showing everything they're doing. So the leaders would be like China, Singapore, UK, the US, parts of Europe, the GCC region, the Gulf um, Cooperation Council area. Like UAE and things like that. They definitely are caught up and definitely making the right investments. Canada would be up there, things like that. So there's a lot of countries out there that are, great examples. Singapore is a good one because they have to work with. They're such a small country; they have to work with all other regions. So they're a good one, and they're a leader in safety. So now you talk about what should we do in terms of safety, right? So risk, governance, safety, ethical use, privacy, regulatory, all of that kind of stuff. I would say Singapore is a good one to follow. Canada is a good one to use as a hallmark. Um, U.S. in from an innovation standpoint, because they came out with the AI action plan back in August. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a leader from an innovation standpoint. It may not be a leader in some other areas, but they definitely, they want to make sure that they don't get behind from an innovation and being able to keep up with the rest of the world and things like that and stay ahead of the rest of the world. So their policies are definitely designed to make sure that they have that kind of leadership. So if you look at safety and how do we make sure we're safe and things like that, um, the European Union is probably really good at that, but
Mm.
because they have so much regulatory, it'll stall
Yeah.
innovation. So they're going to fall behind, right? So it's a delicate balance. You can't have
Mm.
too much and then everybody falls behind.
And,
So,
and I love this because, and I know that I asked you another question, but since you are right there, let's gonna make a parenthesis because I guess that the regulation versus innovation situation is super important. It's something that it worries many founders and CEOs in Europe. How do we strike this balance over the next decade so that safety and ethics don't choke innovation, but yet innovation doesn't out, outspace the safeguards?
so what I would recommend for CEOs, there's absolutely risk frameworks that you can already use. There's one from ISO. Um, let's see here. I think it's the 4700 01. Let me just do a quick check here. just so I get it right. But if you look at ISO and just ask for risk framework for safety, things like that. Um, and let's see here. I'm just going to do a live kind of check here. So, anyways, ISO for sure. So, International Standards Organization, ISO AI framework. Let me um, just check. So, ISO for sure. IEEE, they have
Mm-hmm.
1,000 series. Singapore has a governance framework. They have a verify framework, things like that. They're a good one to follow. Um, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S., has a risk management framework. So there's ones out there that, you know, so let's see here. Yes, the ISO one, it's 42001, risk AI risk management framework. So
Mm-hmm.
then let's see here. And yeah, 42001. And then NIST, as I mentioned, they have a risk management framework. So there's already existing frameworks out there that you can follow as a company.
Okay.
These are very company friendly, and if you want a
See,
corporation,
ISO, IEEE, they have these
yeah,
frameworks that can help companies to do this. And then
but
I,
there's a company you could follow too. Microsoft is pretty good. So Microsoft
okay.
has a whole bunch of um, frameworks and tools you can use to ensure safety and ethical and compliance and all of that kind of stuff.
So
So
if a regulator is watching us today and say, okay, um, how do I make sure that I'm not stopping the innovation of my country at the same time that I'm safeguarding, the ethics of implementation of AI? What would be like a short advice that you will give to that regulator?
if there's a regulator that wants to be innovation first and not so much on the other end, like the European Union, where maybe they're really heavy on the regulatory side. Good ones to look at are UK, Canada, and Singapore. If you're really innovation focused, a good one to look at is the US.
Right.
But but some people may say they're not prioritizing safety enough. But if you look at what they're doing, they're definitely looking at innovation as we want to make sure that innovation is forefront, right? So
So I want to go back then to the what countries do you believe, but I want to then add a little bit of context on education because UNESCO they said earlier this year that half of the world workforce will face significant tax disruption from advanced automation by mid 2030s, and we've seen already that even AI Gen AI most likely is going to scrap all early or entry jobs type of a scenario into the companies. So I'm thinking what type of policies, education, workforce retraining, social protections, most the governments and corporations put in place now to prepare societies for that level of change. So my question to you, Stephen, is like, what countries do you think that are, getting ahead on this, especially on this AI governance today? And from your UN AI for Good perspective, what lessons from from the industries that you have been working with we can be applied more to ASI? What is your idea on this?
Singapore again. I would look at Singapore as a good country to kind of model and see what they're doing. Canada's doing some good things as well. If you look at the GCC region, the UAE and the Saudis, but UAE in particular, doing a lot of really thoughtful thinking. There's a foundation called the Dubai Future Foundation. You should look at some of
Mm-hmm.
their work. In fact, I just came from opening keynoting at their health conference in Dubai, right? So, and in my keynote, I had a lot of examples from that region because they're really world leaders in many respects, right? So, So traditionally, we used to think of the European countries as world leaders. No, so sorry to say, but no. I mean, there are certain countries within Europe that are,
They're trying.
po
Yeah.
I mean, Poland is just what announced an AI minister of some sort, an
Mm.
AI that's like part of the cabinet or something, I think. So that's kind of where things are going, right? And you're seeing that in the GCC region. So I mean,
So
there's
that's
there's a
also
lot
this
of
framework that is very possible that you start doing it also in companies, like to have this AI officer that is not actually a person, that is just an AI entity that it can you.
yeah. There's a movement now. You're just started to see the glimpses of this where company or countries are bringing in an AI to be part of the cabinet or part of the decision-making process, right? And as an entity, right? So
Yeah. I, I,
and
I guess it's a very cool model to have.
yeah, so there's a lot going on. From your audience standpoint, there are no shortcuts. You're gonna have to spend time reading what's on the edge, and then taking that and thinking about let's do some proof of concepts and then run some pilots. And then from the pilots, let's scale to one division. And then from that division, then scale it to the entire organization. That process takes 3 years or 3 to 5 years, right? So you can't wait. You've got to start now. Otherwise, you're going to end out of business. That's the way it is. And it's not like before where it used to take 10 years for someone to go out of business or 20 years. You can go out of business in a year, right?
So I want to take your minds in and try to go a little bit further into the future. The World Bank projects that global population will reach nearly 10 billion by 2050, and all of today's school children will be, whatever was in elementary school, they will be the workforce of the future. What skills, either technical or those ones that are very human, deeply human, you think that are most valuable when ASI will fully be integrated into every industry by then?
And resilience. So it's not so much skill, it's probably more character. So
Hmm.
Angela Duckworth's kind of idea of grit. So resilience, agility, being dynamic, optimistic, being open to learning. Um, so those kinds of skills are really, really important. So having endurance, because the world is becoming chaotic, right? So you have to be very agile. You can't get stuck into one area and think, "Oh, I'm really safe here." You have to have this idea of combinatorial thinking. So live in a world of combinatorial thinking. So combinatorial thinking is expose yourself to a lot of different dynamic environments. Be comfortable with that dynamic of being in different environments. Be entrepreneurial in your thinking. Entrepreneurial, always thinking about what's the solution, not the problem, but what's the solution, right? How can I make it better? Rather than there's a challenge, there's a barrier, I don't know what to do. An entrepreneur says there's a challenge, there's a barrier. That's great. That's something I can solve, right? So
Right.
be very problem solve. So I would say it's more characteristics and then in your studies, still continue to study technology, but always keeping courses on the edge. So lifelong learning on the edge, lifelong learning
Right.
on the new kinds of things that are needed in the marketplace. And what will happen is that humans ultimately will become orchestrators. And I'll give you a good example. Back in May, a group of mathematicians, 30 mathematicians met at Berkeley for a couple of days for these are top mathematicians, right?
Hmm.
And they were working on tier one math problem. A tier one math problem is one where they're so difficult that these top mathematicians working with their top PhD students could take 5 months to solve. They're solvable,
Hmm.
but they would take 5 months to solve or 4 months or something like that, right? So they started working on these tier one problems, which are never seen before. So there's no
Right.
data set in the internet, whatever. And they decided to give O4 Mini, and in fact, quite an old model now. OpenAI, because it's O for mini, because now we're on to 5, right?
Right, right.
But O or for mini, and they gave one of these problems that would have taken them months to solve, right? And it looked at it, researched it for 2 minutes, and then it created a toy version of the problem, like a simpler version, to see if it could solve it. Then it went away and thought for like 8 minutes, and came back and had a solution. And in fact, when it gave the solution, it was even kind of cocky, saying, "Hey," and I'm paraphrasing, but kind of like, "Hey, look at what I've done. I've solved it." And with no citations needed, like I did it on my own, right? And the mathematicians, there's
Where,
one named Ken Ono. He actually went public with it, and he said it was shocking. I mean,
where's,
I'm paraphrasing, but he was shocked because he didn't think that AI would have the capability of solving a novel math problem never seen before, because that's human. He thinks that's only
right,
human.
right.
It's a human realm, right? And so he when they came out with a bit of a public release on what he says, they realized that their role will change as mathematicians from problem solving to orchestrating the problem, setting up the problem. Okay, so that's one interesting story that happened. Another interesting story that happened is in July, there was the Coder World Finals.
Mm,
It's a global coding championship, right? And like 2 years ago, the top AI was like ranked the millionth. A year ago, the top AI was ranked maybe in the top 750. Months ago, it was ranked in the top 500, let's say.
right.
In July, at this World Coding Championship with the best programmers in the world, this coder from OpenAI, an AI, entered the
Mm-hmm.
contest. It was in first place much of the time, and only at the end did this Polish coder actually win, and he was exhausted because it pushed him. But so it came in second place, right? Now, what happened after that at the International Math Olympiad, which is a really famous math competition. So there's another
Right.
mathematic competition. Uh, what happened was two AIs came in with gold, and the Fields Medal winner earlier had said, this is like 30, 40 years out, and this happened this year, right? As a top math solver, and then just recently, OpenAI and Google entered the international code. There's this Olympiad for coding, international programming competition, right? It's like the premier collegiate programming championship, right?
Mm.
And OpenAI claims they're scored perfect. It solved all 12 of 12 problems. And Google solved 10 of 12 problems, which gave it a gold. And the top human, I think, solved 11 of 12. So this, a year ago, would not have thought to be possible. So you're seeing these things which were thought to be not possible happening. And some of these things can self-improve. So not only can they do things, they can improve themselves, right? Like
Yeah, and I
alpha
guess
evolve can self-improve.
I love the way that you frame it on this, what these mathematicians say that their their job is going to change from A to B or A to Z or even to F or G.
Right.
And what it worries me personally is that we're teaching the machine to do things that we did or that we do, and then the machine will teach us more so we can probably evolve. I guess that ideally that's what I would like to happen. Right? So we can get more and more intelligent and not only make the machine more intelligent. So I guess that this is the ethical problem that we face, right? How or what it will be the next generation of thinkers that continue outgrowth what AI or ASI will do for us. Because yes, when ASI is better than the best of us, can can we continue that race up? Because I guess that today humanity indeed is more intelligent than maybe 200 years ago um, will be more intelligent, and the AI will help us to be more intelligent than this generation.
So what will happen, and you've seen this with Neuralink and Precision Neuroscience and Synchron. Those are three companies that use invasive brain surgery to
Mm-hmm.
do brain-computer interfaces, right? Neuralink is the most invasive. Then there's Precision Neuroscience, not as much, and then Synchron the least. And then there's all non-invasive ways of interfacing with the brain as well. I estimate maybe over 70 patients already by the end of this year. Um, there's already the ability to experiments running where people can communicate without talking, just through thought. They can control devices, an iPad, just through thought. And so what'll happen is that represents kind of like the next paradigm where you will be communicating seamlessly through thought with a computer, right? And then that will give you tremendous much greater insight. So really, what we're heading towards is a hybrid. And when I did the keynote in 2019 to YPO, I said that we're going to enter a phase where there's going to be classical human beings like us, classical, just there's going to be augmented meaning like with some kind of device on us, brain computer interface. And then there'll be hybrids where they're just fully integrated with this stuff. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't even know. And then there'll be fully autonomous. Fully autonomous will be literally robots with some kind of consciousness.
Right, right.
Uh, and in fact, all are coexisting. If you look at my keynotes, I've said these are already happening, coexisting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
They're there.
yeah, and this is going to become more pronounced. So really, what's going to happen is we're going to marry with these technologies, and it'll give us incredible insight. That's where it's happening. But it's not going to be 2050. It's going to be within the near term, right?
So in every episode of the Text for Set podcast, we have this section that I love that is called the four trends and the four dreams. And what we will do is in the four trends, we will talk about what is happening today that is shaping and those signals that will help us shape the future. And then I will ask you to go to the four dreams, which is your personal vision for the world around, let's say, 2050, when ideally artificial superintelligence may be fully woven into our lives. So let's start with this. You ready?
Sure.
So what will be a trend that you see right now in technology? And you have given us some clues already. What is that the trend that leaders should track into the next, I don't know, 5 months?
So the period of kind of a chaotic, um, we live in a somewhat chaotic world, right? A lot of changes
Right.
occurring. That will continue and will get more chaotic. And so that's one trend I see. So how do you prepare for that? You have to be resilient and then be agile and not be concerned. It's just like when you do a startup, right?
Right.
People who are inexperienced as startups, they panic when there's this volatility. But if you're an experienced serial entrepreneur, you think that's just the way it is, right? So
So we're in this VUCA environment so your trend number one is uncertainty.
the uncertainty is continuing and it'll get more uncertain, and to be resilient.
All right. And then your trend number two, what else do you see in there?
Economic disruption globally.
Right. Right.
And
Good.
you're going to have to hedge against that economic disruption by looking at what the economic trends are, and then trying to safeguard as much as you can your assets in some way.
Okay. Your trend number three?
The technological S10 shift and this convergence, which is completely change society in fundamental ways. They'll change industry, education, society, wealth, every aspect of what you consider to be the norm will be fundamentally disrupted by the S10, the synergistic 10, and the shift dynamic that's happening in real time, and which will play out in real time in the next few years.
And what about the trend number four?
The trend number four is the societal aspect ramifications of that.
Mm,
So and so there's kind of a change in the thinking of thinking not as, like traditionally people think of there's minorities and there's majorities, like Western Europeans, or North Americans, they think of they're the majority. And then my family came from Japan in the 1800s. They think I'm a minority. There's a new term, the global majority. I'm in the global majority. So
mm,
let's think about the global majority. So the world has to think about the implications of the global majority and then
right.
working together. Right.
But one thing that probably we're going to speak about on this trends, and we, you and I come from this telco industry, and I see that this global energy demand for AI data centers that could rival that is going to be the size of even like mid-sized nations. What sustainability trend around this do you think is going to be defined in the next 5 years? Because the energy consumption that is coming is crazy. Will be your take on that?
Okay, so let me give you some data. The International Energy Agency is predicting that 3% of global energy will be consumed by data centers by 2030. So that's about 1,000 terawatts. Okay.
Yeah.
There's another study, I believe it's the Department of Energy, but I may have that wrong. But there is another study suggesting that in the U.S., between 6.7 to 12%
Mm,
by 2028 of U.S. energy would be consumed by data centers. So definitely there's a concern. The other thing too is another piece of data is that we have exascale supercomputers, right? Like El Capitan and one of the national laboratories in the U.S. We have Frontier at Oak Ridge. We have Aurora at Oregon National Laboratories. Those are supercomputers, the exascale.
mm,
Exascale means that they can do a billion operations per second. That's a quintillion operations per second. I would say that's equivalent to 30,000 iPhone 18s working simultaneously, right? Um, the prediction is that the next iteration from exascale to zetascale is a trillion billion operations per second,
mm-hmm.
will consume 500 megawatts. Just that one computer is will consume half a gigawatt, right? Just that one supercomputer. Now, what happens is hyperscalers like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, and others, including Meta and um, what Tesla and Grok and things are doing. That they're also producing these data centers, but these data centers are now hyperscalers are is a Zetascale class actually. Oracle actually came out this year and has indicated that we actually can provide Zetascale cloud computing now. This, by the way, it used to be that um, the marketplace used to think that Zetascale was 2035, 2040.
Mm.
There's now already Zetascale, a trillion billion is like 30 million iPhone 20s working together. We're at iPhone 17-ish. I'm talking iPhone 20s, right?
Okay.
That's how powerful they are. And you see these announcements of 10 gigawatts of power required and things like that. I mean, it's just incredible, right? A nuclear reactor output is about 1.1 to 1.3 gigawatts, right? So more than a nuclear reactor, right? So okay, so we have this trend, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's but that's based on existing materials. Now, keep in mind that Taiwan Semiconductor, so I'm now transferring to Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor is number one chip manufacturer in the world. They're going to scale on 2 nanometer, and their 2 nanometer can save something like 25 to 30% on power. It's more efficient. In 2026, they're going to, let's see here, uh, 1.6 nanometer. In 2028, they'll go to 1.4 nanometer, and then they'll go sub a nanometer. In other words, the smaller these things get, the more of these components you can pack, the more energy efficient they are. There's also quite a bit of work on new energy efficient materials, new kinds of science, which can reduce power capabilities by maybe 1,000 times, right? So, and then AI working with supercomputers and quantum computers they call hybrid systems. They're working on normal material types, things like that. So you got this other trend of saying, is there a more efficient way that we can create energy? Or, sorry, like chips, like new kinds of chips, but also, are there more efficient ways we can do nuclear reactors and things like that? So there's another trend that's saying maybe we can reduce the power consumption because on hybrid systems, which are supercomputing, quantum, and AI, are already coming into being this year. And quantum computers are already going into fault tolerance. In other words, it used to be with quantum computers, you have these thing called qubits. They're noisy and they break down and they don't stay consistent enough, coherent enough that you work on a real problem. But through error correction, you get these things called logical qubits. They're stable enough that you could start working on real problems. That's starting to happen this year. And then it's going to increase to about 2029, where there's a many companies are projecting that they'll have fairly stable quantum computing where you can work on real big problems, which could be things like, what's a new novel material for chips? What's a way of optimizing energy? What's a way of optimizing data centers? What's a way of creating new kinds of energy? What's a way of creating new kinds of battery materials? What's a new kinds of way of creating solar cells for sustainable energy? So that's going to help address this burgeoning need for power. So it's not
and do you see Taiwan continue to leading the semiconductor space, or you think that there is a way that maybe the effort that the United States is doing is going to take over the international semiconductor space?
Right now, Taiwan Semiconductor occupies 60% of all chip manufacturing. And they do 90% of all advanced logic chips. 90% is Taiwan Semiconductor. That's why, and that's why Taiwan Semiconductor has now done a huge investment in the U.S. They realize that they need to, and because of President Trump and kind of his regime of trying to get more onshore manufacturing, that is occurring. So Taiwan manufacturing is doing huge, like 50 billion in investment, right, to move onshore in the U.S. manufacturing. Intel has also received support from the U.S. government, and NVIDIA has also now made a huge investment. NVIDIA, a competitor, has now made a huge investment into Intel. In fact, there was just a recent announcement on this, maybe 2 days ago. And so what that does, that is, it's going to increase the chip manufacturing. It's going in the U.S. So because of this kind of problem in chip shortages, a lot of money is going into that. A lot of money is going into new kind of chip technologies to make them more efficient, less power. There's photonic chips, which can have 1,000% increase in capability and 1,000 decrease in power. So there's a lot of things going out. So sometimes when you see numbers like, as I mentioned, 12% by 2028 U.S. energy consumed by data centers, that's not taking into consideration all the developments that are occurring to address it, right?
So I'm going to take you to the 4 dreams, which I would like you to get maybe your response back, let's say in 1 word, so we can see where you are at. It's in 2050 dream, right? It's not forecast, it's just how you wish. So let's think it's 2050, what it would be like the breakthrough that we already achieved.
So I'm an optimist, and I believe we'll live in abundance, and we'll have acceleration of our capabilities by a quintillion times. In other words, you, Diana, would be your ability to see and look at things will be amplified a quintillion times.
And what about societal transformation, 2050? What would you like to see?
Happiness and abundance and peace.
I love that. Then my number 3, or your number 3 dream, way of technology deepens our humanity. What do you think?
humanity and technology will interweave to a point where it'll be seamless. We won't even think of technology as technology anymore.
It's so embedded into us.
It'll be so embedded, yeah.
Okay, and what it will be a challenge that we finally solve by 2050?
Aging, cancer. I mean, all major challenges will be solved easily by 2050. Easily. It's much sooner.
I love that because these trends and dreams that you have gave us, Stephen, they give us definitely a roadmap from the next 5 years to all the way to mid-century. This is fantastic. I really love it. Before we wrap up, because time it's crazy. Yes, I can spend hours and days speaking to you. What I would love to do is I would like to close, maybe leave with our to our listeners to a little bit of your guidance. If you will be able to go back to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give that, or what would you say to that Stephen Ibaraki 18-year-old? Although by 18-year-old you already achieve a lot of stuff. I mean, your own personal computer 10. So if you will go back when you were 18, what would you say to that little Stephen?
It's an interesting. So keep in mind, I was reading at 3 encyclopedias and built my first computer when I was 10 and things like that. So I actually foresaw even when I was really young where we are today. So if I were to go back, I would say it will happen and just work harder.
I love this. And do you have maybe a mentor that have given you the best advice that you have really banked on it? What would be that best advice you ever received?
Anytime you engage with anybody, make sure that you add value. So they walk away and they say, I learned something. I made a new connection. I saw another view of something that expanded, made me wholer, and made me feel that I've grown. So my advice is, anytime you interact with anybody, be a be a servant leader, serve their need, so they walk away and say, you know what, I've grown from that encounter.
I love this. I love this. And what will be that piece of advice that you will give to any CEO or board director member that you're watching us today in this episode, so they can prepare for a future with ASI like right now?
They need to embrace combinatorial thinking. Combinatorial thinking is thinking in many different areas and putting themselves on the outlier. So, for example, in all of the keynotes, I always point to ACM and IEEE because we produce daily news briefs of what's happening out there. In fact, at my last keynote, which I just gave a few days ago, I looked at 5,000 innovations that appeared this year with ACM and IEEE, and I pulled out 100 for my audience. So in my keynote, I had a QR code on my slide, and that QR code pointed to 22 reports I created for them. And one of the reports was 5,000 innovations that I curated from ACM and IEEE. We're number one in computing science and number one in tech engineering. And I selected 100 and profiled it for the audience. And I said, that's awaiting you. So I gave them a resource, a toolkit, so they could start looking into the future. Together with recommendations of resources they should be consuming today.
I love this. Well, as we're wrapping up today, these are my three takeaways that I've learned from our conversation. So my first one is artificial superintelligence could emerge for like way sooner than most of the leaders are expecting, with the first economic and industry shockwaves appearing already by the next 2 years. Then my second takeaway is global governance and ethical guardrails. They must keep in peace, but from the national policy to maybe a board strategy, I guess that we need to channel ASI for good. This is kind of like what I'm taking from you, Stephen. And then my third takeaway from our today conversation, I got here, human adaptability. Our creativity, our values, our leadership will be that ultimate differentiator, because a world where machines are going to think better than what we are, this is what will keep us human. Anything else that you believe that we need to give our audience as a last takeaway from you?
Always think and model what you do, Diana, and that is creativity, harmony, excellence, compassion, right? And working not in silos, but working together. Because in togetherness, we can do so much more, right? And togetherness also means with AI. So,
It's true. It's true. It's not only between humans, but also with the systems and the processes, the machines that we're creating. Stephen, thank you. Thank you for sharing your vision and for giving us such a clear window into the coming age of artificial superintelligence is giving you your insights from the early signals that we should be watching to those long-term dreams for 2050 are exactly the kind of foresight our audience of leaders are in need to hear and to look at. And thank you so much for your feedback.
yeah, it was a great pleasure. And we went beyond your 30 minutes.
I know. We're trying to do this in 30 minutes, but it's impossible. It's like you have so much insight to give us. So thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay, it was a delight. Thank you again.
And for everyone listening to the Tech Foresight podcast, thank you for joining us into this journey into the future. In today's conversation, we hopefully that is part of these new ideas for your boardroom, for your own leadership path. Share this episode with a colleague, leave us a review, and follow the Tech Foresight podcast wherever you're getting at your podcast. And so hopefully you never miss a big conversation shaping the technology, what is going on in the society. I am Diana Daniels. Until the next time, please keep looking ahead. Let's build together this future that you want to see. Thank you very much.